Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Camp Waverly held a stillness just before evening, the kind of quiet that settles over a firing range when the day's work is almost done. Orange sunlight stretched across the dirt, warming the metal of rifles slung over shoulders, catching the dust that hung in the air like memories. Recruits formed into uneven rows. Their jokes were loud, too loud, the kind of laughter that fills space when men aren't sure what else to do with their hands. A corporal pointed toward the woman near the clipboard, the lone woman. He asked why a civilian was even allowed near a live fire qualification. The question wasn't really a question. It was a statement wrapped in mockery. Laughter rolled through the ranks like thunder before a storm. One Marine muttered that a YouTube tutorial probably taught her everything she knew. She didn't flinch. No rank visible, no patches announcing authority, just quiet posture and calm eyes that watched everything and revealed nothing. She observed trigger placement. She studied footsteps. She said nothing. And that silence, that refusal to engage, irritated them more than any words ever could. Someone asked her to explain wind patterns, a test disguised as curiosity. She didn't answer. She only studied the flags downrange, watching how they moved, how shadows fell across the dirt, starring longer than anyone else thought necessary. A hush settled over the line, not respect, not yet, just confusion. Something about the way she stood hinted at knowledge they hadn't earned, at experience they couldn't recognize because they'd never seen it before. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Dana Keller was 32, though nothing in her posture made her seem older than anyone standing on that range. She was short, slim, the kind of person who could disappear in a crowd if she wanted to. Her hair was pulled back into a simple bun, no styling gel, no decorative piece, just function. She wore a contractor-issued jacket over a plain base shirt, authorized, boring, standard. The kind of clothing that convinced half the Marines she'd been working spreadsheets last month. Her name floated around like something administrative. Someone said they heard she came from logistics. Someone else said she was probably a civilian trainer who only taught theory. Her personnel file was invisible to Marines. Not unusual but convenient for assumptions. Privately, they believed she had never held a weapon outside of static range conditions. It shaped how they spoke around her. Loud, unfiltered, borderline dismissive. During breaks, she sat alone at the corner tables, not scrolling her phone like others, not eating loudly, not joining conversations. She didn't ask questions about them, didn't lean into their jokes, didn't try to earn their trust. She ate, finished early, stood and walked back toward the equipment racks. No animation, no emotion, just movement with purpose they couldn't understand. Lance Corporal Tyler Briggs was 21, and everything about him pushed outward. Loud, competitive, running commentary about everything. He had the type of voice that ricocheted down metal walls of the armory. If someone else finished first, he immediately volunteered to prove he could finish faster. Pride wrapped in camouflage. PFC Nolan Harper followed whatever energy surrounded him. If Tyler laughed, Nolan laughed harder. If someone rolled eyes, Nolan did the same. He didn't hate anyone. He just mirrored the group, not wanting to be the odd one out. Safety in numbers, safety in noise. Sergeant Andrew Dalton was 30 and ran the evaluation section with the kind of skepticism that comes from experience. He had seen contractors fail before, academics who didn't understand recoil, volunteers who memorized safety procedures but couldn't execute under pressure. His doubt wasn't personal. It was survival-based. Experience taught him that someone always claimed expertise, but very few actually held it. On the second afternoon of orientation, Marines lined up for weapons inspection. Dana moved down the line with methodical patience. No rush, no uncertainty. When she reached Nolan, she noticed his magazine wasn't fully seated. One wrong bump and it would drop. She didn't announce it. She didn't embarrass him. She pressed it gently upward until the latch clicked. He blinked, confused. Tyler noticed and snickered. "She going to babysit our weapons, too?" Nolan shrugged, but embarrassment rose visibly in his throat. Dana didn't address the remark. She simply moved forward, adjusting sling tension on the next Marine to prevent shoulder bruising. Dalton watched her, irritated, not because she was wrong, but because she moved as if corrections were obvious. Contractors usually asked permission to intervene. Dana didn't. That confidence made Marines assume she was overstepping rather than protecting safety. It's easier to dismiss competence than acknowledge you missed something simple. Lunch that day was loud. Tyler reenacted the magazine correction, shaking his rifle dramatically, making everyone laugh. Nolan tried to laugh along so nobody thought he was bothered, but he kept glancing in Dana's direction. She sat alone again, sandwich half finished, eyes low, posture composed. Someone at another table joked that civilian trainers become experts just from reading manuals. More laughter rolled. Dana listened, but the sound passed over her like wind against canvas. That absence of reaction frustrated some of them. Discomfort often starts when someone refuses to participate in the rhythm of a group. Right before she stood, she rested one hand lightly against her jacket's edge, not pulling it closed, not adjusting it for warmth, more like grounding herself for whatever the afternoon would bring. A subtle act barely seen, but there was certainty in it. Nobody noticed her expression change. Nobody realized she had heard every joke. Nobody suspected she had more knowledge in one silent movement than they had behind 50 loud remarks. She threw her trash away, nodded toward nobody, and walked back out toward the edge of the range. Calm, steady, as if nothing anyone said could bend her shape. What were they about to learn the hard way? Day 2 started colder, the kind of chill that crept under uniforms and sat in the joints. The range smelled of oil and churned up dirt, the echo of yesterday's laughter still hanging somewhere above the berm. Failure to stop drills lined the morning schedule. 3 round bursts meant to stitch muscle memory into anyone who would soon see real combat. Targets flipped up in uneven rhythm. Marines stepped forward on command, rifles shouldered, feet planted in what they believed was confidence. Shots cracked in waves, followed by the mechanical rattle of bolts locking back and magazines dropping to sand. When the line went cold and the range staff walked forward, the patterns told a different story. Groups were loose, hits drifted to the left, some barely stayed center mass. Sergeant Dalton studied the papers with a tightening jaw. "This is not focus," he snapped, holding up one shot card so the line could see. "You are treating this like a game. Deployment will not be this forgiving." Tyler, standing among the front, shook his head and muttered just loud enough. "Maybe it's the extra eyes on us. Outside influence tends to mess with rhythm." A few Marines barked laughter, eager to release tension by blaming anyone but themselves. Nolan smirked in spite of his own poor score. The implication was obvious. The only outside influence on that range was the quiet contractor with the clipboard. Dana heard every word. She did not flinch or glance their way. She just tracked the wind flag near the berm and watched how it lagged behind the feel of the air against her face. Dalton ordered another round. "Reset, failure to stop, make your shots count this time." They fired again. Dust kicked against boots. Spent casings bounced off helmets and dropped into collars. Some cursed under their breath as burns flashed against skin. When the line went cold a second time, results still leaned left. Dalton exhaled sharply, then turned to Dana as if the presence he had barely acknowledged yesterday now stood directly in his line of fire. "Anything you would like to contribute, ma'am?" His tone was polite on the surface, edged underneath. One of the Marines, a tall sergeant candidate from another platoon, barked first. "Yeah. Could you explain why all our groups went left this afternoon, ma'am, since you're observing so closely?" Eyes shifted from him to her, waiting for a stumble, for a guess, for a line from a book. Dana looked downrange, not at the paper. Thermal dropped after midday. Air is cooler near the ground. Wind is carrying slightly left to right at surface level but flags red crosswind at chest height. You're correcting for the wrong layer. Silence. She continued, voice steady, unbothered. Your rifles are zeroed for standard conditions. Temperature shift changed barrel harmonics. Groups drift because you're not compensating for cold bore versus warm bore after sustained fire. More silence. Tyler's jaw tightened. Nolan looked at his boots. Dalton's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. She wasn't guessing. She was diagnosing. Adjust your holds 2 clicks right, she said calmly. Fire one cold shot, let the barrel warm, then fire your group. You'll see the difference. Dalton didn't argue, he didn't thank her either. He simply ordered the line to adjust. They did. And when they fired again, groups tightened. Hits centered. The difference was undeniable. Nobody apologized. Nobody acknowledged they'd been wrong, but the jokes stopped. The laughter died. And when they walked off the range that afternoon, they walked quieter, not broken, not humiliated, just thoughtful. Dana closed her notebook, tucked her pen into her jacket pocket, and walked toward the equipment shed. Alone, still, as if proving a point had never been the goal. But the question lingered in the air behind her. How did she know that? Evening fell over Camp Waverly with the kind of slow fade that feels like exhaling. The sky turned purple, then gray, then black. Lights flickered on across the compound, casting long shadows over gravel paths and chain-link fences. Inside the barracks, Marines sat on footlockers, cleaning rifles, checking gear, speaking in low tones that didn't carry beyond their bunks. Tyler sat near the window, running a cloth down his rifle barrel with slow, deliberate strokes. Nolan lay on his rack, staring at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Nolan broke the silence. She knew exactly what was wrong. Tyler didn't look up. Yeah. Like instantly. Yeah. Nolan sat up, elbows on knees. You think she's actually been downrange? Tyler paused mid-stroke, then resumed cleaning. I don't know, maybe. Nobody talks like that unless they've done it, Nolan said quietly. She didn't guess, she just knew. Tyler set his rifle down and leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. We were assholes. Nolan didn't argue, he just nodded. Across the compound, in the quieter section where contractors stayed, Dana sat on the edge of her bunk, boots unlaced, jacket still on. She didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small desk lamp that cast a warm glow across her hands. She held a photograph, edges worn from handling. A group photo. 8 people in desert camouflage, faces sunburned and smiling, standing in front of a helicopter with rotors still spinning. She wasn't smiling in the photo, but her eyes were different then. Younger, less guarded. She studied the faces, some she still spoke to, some she hadn't heard from in years, one she would never hear from again. She placed the photo back in her bag, zipped it closed, and leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, breathing steady. Somewhere outside, boots crunched on gravel. Voices carried across the night air, fading into distance. The sound of a door slamming, the hum of generators. The world kept moving, indifferent to memory, indifferent to loss. Dana opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. She didn't need their respect. She didn't need their apologies. She had learned a long time ago that proving yourself to people who doubted you was a waste of energy. You either knew what you were doing or you didn't. The rest was just noise. But something about their assumptions had stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were lazy. They saw a woman, saw a contractor, saw someone quiet and filled in the blanks with stereotypes. They didn't ask. They didn't wonder. They just assumed. And assumptions, she knew, could get people killed. She stood, laced her boots, and walked outside. The night air was cool, sharp against her skin. She walked toward the firing range, hands in her pockets, steps slow and deliberate. The range was empty now, targets stacked, brass swept, flags lowered. She stood at the firing line and looked downrange, letting the silence settle around her. This was where she felt most at peace. Not in crowds, not in conversation, but here, where skill mattered more than words, where precision replaced politics, where the only thing that counted was whether you could do the job. She heard footsteps behind her, slow, cautious. Sergeant Dalton approached, stopping a few feet away. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, hands clasped behind his back, staring downrange like she was. Finally he spoke. "You were right today." Dana didn't turn. "I know." He almost smiled. Most contractors would have rubbed it in. "I'm not most contractors." Another silence, longer this time. "How long were you in?" he asked. Dana hesitated, not because she didn't want to answer, but because the answer was complicated. "Long enough." Dalton nodded. He didn't push. He understood that some things weren't meant to be explained. "They're talking about you in the barracks." "I heard." "They feel like idiots." "Good." Dalton glanced at her, surprised by the bluntness. Dana finally turned to face him, expression calm, eyes steady. Feeling like an idiot is the first step to learning. If they don't feel it, they won't change. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're not here just to observe, are you?" Dana looked back downrange. "I'm here to make sure they don't die doing something stupid." "That's a tall order." "It's the only order that matters." Dalton stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the compound. Dana remained at the firing line, alone again, the way she preferred. The night settled around her like a blanket, quiet and dark and endless. But somewhere in that darkness, she felt the weight of what was coming, the weight of what she knew, the weight of what she couldn't say. Why couldn't she tell them the truth? Day 3 arrived with tension hanging in the air like smoke. The Marines moved differently, less cocky, less loud. They assembled at the firing line with a focus that hadn't existed before. Eyes forward, mouths shut, shoulders squared. Dana stood at the edge of the range, clipboard in hand, watching them settle into position. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the shift. She simply waited for them to be ready. Dalton called the line to attention. "Today we're running combat reloads under time pressure. You will move, you will shoot, you will reload, and you will not waste motion. Clear." "Clear, Sergeant." Dana stepped forward, voice calm but cutting through the morning air. "Before you start, watch." The Marines turned toward her, uncertain. She set her clipboard down, picked up a rifle from the rack, and moved to the firing line. No announcement, no explanation. She simply demonstrated. Magazine out, clean, controlled. The spent mag dropped but never clattered because her hand angled the weapon just enough to soften the fall. New magazine in, no scraping, no fumbling. Bolt catch released without slamming the weapon off zero. One breath. Done. 7 seconds if someone counted. No wasted motion. No frantic energy. The kind of fluidity that comes from doing something 10,000 times until it becomes reflex. She set the rifle down and stepped back. "Your turn." The Marines moved to the line, slower this time, more deliberate. Tyler dropped his magazine, caught it mid-fall, inserted the new one with precision he hadn't shown before. Nolan's reload was smoother, quieter, controlled. Dalton watched, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't a civilian trainer reading from a manual. This was someone who had done this under fire. Someone who had learned these movements not in a classroom, but in places where mistakes meant dying. The drills continued through the morning. Failure to stop, transition drills, barricade shooting. Each time Dana offered small corrections, a slight adjustment to stance, a reminder about breathing, a tip on sight alignment under stress. And each time the Marines listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. By midday the transformation was undeniable. Groups tightened, reload times dropped, movements became fluid. The range wasn't loud anymore. It was focused, purposeful. During a water break, Nolan approached Dana, hesitant but determined. "Can I ask you something?" Dana looked at him, expression neutral. "Go ahead." "How do you stay so calm? Like nothing rattles you. She considered the question, then looked out across the range. Because panic is a choice, and I've seen what happens when people choose it. Nolan frowned, processing. You've been in combat. It wasn't a question. Dana didn't answer. She just held his gaze for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the firing line. But Nolan understood. The silence was answer enough. As the afternoon wore on, word began to spread. Not loudly, not officially, but in the way rumors always spread on military bases. Quiet conversations in hallways, whispers over meals. Someone knew someone who knew someone who had worked with her before. The name started to take shape. Not Dana the contractor, not Dana the observer, but Dana Keller, former Navy, former something else. The details were vague, deliberately so, but the implication was clear. She had been somewhere, done something, earned something. Tyler heard it from a sergeant who worked logistics. Nolan heard it from a corporal who deployed twice. Dalton heard it from a staff sergeant who'd been in joint operations and recognized her name immediately. By evening formation, the entire platoon knew. Not everything, but enough. And when Dana walked onto the range the next morning, the atmosphere had changed completely. Not fear, not reverence, just respect. The kind of respect that doesn't need explanation. The kind that settles into bones and changes how you move. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't thank them for finally seeing her. She just opened her clipboard and called the first drill. But something had shifted, and everyone felt it. What would it take for the truth to finally come out? Day 4 began with fog so thick you could barely see the targets downrange. The air was damp, cold, clinging to skin and fabric. Marines assembled slower, quieter, the weight of the previous days sitting heavy on their shoulders. Dalton stood at the head of the formation, arms crossed, expression grim. Today's scenario is simple. You're moving through limited visibility. Targets will appear at random. You will identify, engage, and move. Hesitation gets you killed. Panic gets your team killed. Questions. Silence. Good. Keller will observe and correct as needed. A few Marines glanced at Dana, not with resentment, not anymore, just acknowledgement. She nodded once, then stepped to the side, clipboard ready. The drills began. One by one, Marines moved through the fog, rifles up, eyes scanning. Targets flipped up suddenly, shadows in the mist. Some Marines fired clean. Others hesitated, second-guessing, losing precious seconds. Dana watched everything, every movement, every breath, every moment of doubt. When Tyler moved through, he fired fast, accurate, but his footwork was sloppy. He nearly tripped over uneven ground, rifle swinging wide. Dana made a note. When he finished, she approached him calmly. You're fast, but you're careless. Tyler's jaw tightened. I hit every target. You did, but you also exposed yourself twice. In a real firefight, you'd be dead before the third shot. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because she was right, he knew it. How do I fix it? Dana studied him for a moment. Slow down. Speed without control is just chaos. You want to be fast and alive, not fast and dead. He nodded, jaw set, determined. When Nolan's turn came, he moved too cautiously, second-guessing every step. He fired late, targets dropping only after long hesitation. Dana waited until he returned, breathing hard, frustrated with himself. You're thinking too much, she said simply. I don't want to mess up. Fear of messing up is worse than messing up. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. The moment you start overthinking is the moment you lose. Nolan nodded slowly, absorbing the words. As the day progressed, Dana moved among them like a ghost, present but unobtrusive, correcting without criticizing, teaching without condescending. The Marines began to understand something fundamental. She wasn't there to judge them. She was there to keep them alive. By late afternoon, the fog began to lift. Sunlight broke through in scattered beams, illuminating the range in patches of gold and shadow. The Marines sat on the ground, exhausted, rifles resting across laps, faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Dalton stood before them, hands on hips. Better, not perfect, but better. You're starting to think like a unit instead of individuals. He paused, then glanced at Dana. Keller has something to say. The Marines turned toward her, expectant. Dana stepped forward, expression calm, voice steady. You've improved, but improvement isn't enough. Out there in real combat, there's no second chance, no do-over, no instructor stepping in to correct your form. She paused, letting the words settle. What you do here determines whether you come home. Whether your brothers come home, that's not dramatic, that's just fact. Silence. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to make you competent. And competence requires honesty. About your strengths, about your weaknesses, about the difference between confidence and arrogance. Tyler looked down, jaw tight. Nolan nodded slowly. Some of you thought I didn't belong here, Dana continued, voice even. That's fine. You didn't know me, but now you do. And now you have a choice. You can keep learning, or you can go back to thinking you already know everything. She let that hang in the air for a moment. I hope you choose wisely. She turned and walked back toward the equipment shed, leaving them sitting in silence, processing, thinking, changing. Dalton watched her go, then turned back to the platoon, dismissed. The Marines rose slowly, gathering their gear, speaking in low tones. But the conversation had shifted. No more jokes, no more mockery, just quiet respect for someone who had earned it the hard way. That evening, as the sun set over Camp Waverly, Tyler found Dana sitting alone near the fence line, staring out across the empty range. He approached slowly, hesitant. "Can I sit?" Dana glanced at him, then nodded toward the ground beside her. Tyler sat, silent for a moment, searching for words. "I was wrong about you." "I know." He almost smiled. "You don't make it easy, do you?" "Making it easy isn't my job." They sat in silence, watching the light fade. Finally, Tyler spoke again, voice quieter. "Where did you serve?" Dana didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was distant, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. Places that don't exist on maps, doing things that don't exist in reports. Tyler understood. He didn't push, he just nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on us." Dana looked at him, expression softening just slightly. "I never gave up. I was just waiting for you to start trying." He nodded again, then stood and walked back toward the barracks, leaving Dana alone once more. She sat there as darkness fell, hands resting on her knees, breathing steady, eyes distant. Somewhere in the night, a door slammed. Voices called out. The world kept moving. But Dana remained still, holding the weight of everything she'd seen, everything she'd done, everything she couldn't say. And she carried it quietly, the way she always had. Would they ever really understand what she'd sacrificed? Day 5 began differently. The Marines arrived at the range early, gear already prepped, rifles cleaned, expressions focused. There was no joking, no bravado, just quiet determination. Dana noticed immediately. She didn't comment. She simply nodded and began the day's drills. But something was building, something unspoken. The Marines moved with a new intensity, a new purpose. They weren't just going through the motions anymore. They were absorbing everything she taught them, applying it, refining it. Tyler's footwork improved. Nolan's hesitation disappeared. Even the quieter Marines who had stayed in the background began stepping forward, asking questions, seeking guidance. Dana answered each question with patience, demonstrating techniques, offering insights she'd learned in places she would never name. And slowly, piece by piece, the Marines transformed. By midday, Sergeant Dalton pulled Dana aside, out of earshot of the others. "I need to tell you something." Dana looked at him, waiting. "There's a colonel coming tomorrow, from Joint Operations. He wants to observe the final qualification." Dana's expression didn't change. Okay. He knows who you are. A pause, a long one. I figured someone would eventually, Dana said quietly. Dalton studied her face. He said you worked with his unit in Syria, 2019. Something about an extraction that went bad. Dana looked away, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. That was a long time ago. He said you saved 12 lives that night. I did my job. He said you refused a commendation, refused recognition, just walked away. Dana turned back to face him, eyes hard, because recognition doesn't bring back the two who didn't make it. Dalton nodded slowly, understanding settling into his bones. The Marines don't know. They don't need to. They deserve to. Dana shook her head. No, they deserve to learn, to train, to survive. My past doesn't matter, their future does. Dalton wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. This wasn't about humility. This was about something deeper, something broken that hadn't fully healed. The colonel will be here at 800, Dalton said finally. He'll probably want to speak with you. Then I'll speak with him. She turned and walked back toward the firing line, shoulders straight, steps measured, carrying the weight of memory like stones in her pockets. That afternoon, the drills intensified. Dana pushed them harder than before, not cruelly but with purpose. She ran them through scenarios that tested everything they'd learned. Movement under fire, reload drills under stress, target acquisition in chaos. And the Marines rose to meet it, every single one. By evening, exhaustion hung heavy over the range, but it was the good kind. The kind that comes from pushing past limits, from discovering you're capable of more than you believed. As the sun set, Dalton called the platoon to formation. Tomorrow is final qualification. Everything you've learned this week will be tested. Pass or fail will be determined by one thing only: performance. He paused, then looked at Dana. Keller has been with us all week. Some of you doubted her, some of you dismissed her, all of you were wrong. The Marine stood silent, eyes forward but listening. Tomorrow, a colonel from Joint Operations will be here. He knows Keller. He knows what she's done, what she's sacrificed, and he's coming because he trusts her judgment. Dalton's voice grew quieter, more intense. So when you step to that line tomorrow, remember that. Remember who trained you, and don't embarrass her. Yes, Sergeant. Dalton dismissed them. The Marines dispersed slowly, glancing back at Dana as they walked away. She stood at the edge of the range, clipboard under her arm, watching the light fade. Nolan approached last, hesitant but determined. Can I ask you something personal? Dana looked at him, expression guarded. You can ask. Do you ever regret it, the things you had to do? The question hung in the air like smoke. Dana was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Every single day. Nolan nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. But you'd do it again. It wasn't a question. Dana met his eyes, and for the first time all week he saw something raw there, something human, something that hurt. If it meant they came home, yes, I'd do it again. Nolan nodded once more, then walked away, leaving Dana standing alone in the gathering darkness. She stood there long after everyone else had gone, stood there as night fell completely, stood there as stars emerged overhead, cold and distant and indifferent. She thought about Syria, about the 12 who made it out, about the 2 who didn't, about the choices she'd made in seconds that would haunt her for lifetimes. She thought about the Marines she'd trained this week, young, cocky, uncertain, but capable, so capable. And she hoped, with everything in her, that they would never have to make the choices she had made, that they would never have to carry what she carried. But she knew better. She knew that some of them would. That war doesn't care about hope. That sacrifice is inevitable. So she stood there in the darkness, alone, preparing herself for tomorrow, for the colonel who would arrive, for the recognition she didn't want, for the questions she couldn't answer. And she breathed in and out, steady, controlled, because that's all she knew how to do anymore. Breathe, survive, carry on. What would tomorrow reveal? Day 6 arrived with crystal clarity. No fog, no clouds, just sharp blue sky and cold morning air that bit at exposed skin. The Marines assembled at dawn, uniforms crisp, gear inspected, expressions serious. Dana arrived quietly as always, but today felt different. Today everyone knew. Word had spread overnight. Not gossip, not rumor. Confirmed information from sergeants who knew, from staff who remembered, from records that couldn't be erased. Dana Keller, former Navy, former Naval Special Warfare Development Group, former operator in places that didn't officially exist. 12 confirmed saves, 2 losses that still woke her up at night. A commendation refused because medals felt like betrayal when not everyone made it home. The Marines didn't stare, didn't whisper, they just stood different, straighter, quieter, with a respect that ran bone deep. At 800 sharp, a vehicle pulled up to the range. Colonel Marcus Reich stepped out, Army Special Forces tab visible on his shoulder, weathered face marking decades of service. He scanned the range, then his eyes found Dana. Something passed between them. Recognition, memory, shared experience that didn't need words. He approached slowly, stopped a few feet away. Keller. Sir. It's been a long time. Yes, sir. He glanced at the Marines standing in formation, then back at her. You've been training them. I have. They know who you are now. Dana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I didn't tell them. You never do. Colonel Reich turned toward the formation, voice carrying across the range. Listen up. Dana Keller is one of the most capable operators I've ever worked with. I've seen her extract hostages under fire, navigate hostile territory with zero support, and make decisions in seconds that most people couldn't make in hours. The Marine stood frozen, absorbing every word. She doesn't talk about it because the best ones never do. But you should know who's been standing on this range with you all week. You should know that the corrections she gave you, the techniques she taught you, the patience she showed you, all of that came from someone who's been where you're going. Someone who knows exactly what it takes to survive. He paused, letting it sink in. She knows more about weapons than 90% of active personnel in joint units. If she tells you something, do it. If she corrects you, pay attention. People like her don't talk loud, but when they speak, you should listen. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nolan's breathing slowed. Tyler's shoulders lowered. Dalton stared at Dana like seeing her for the first time, not as a contractor, not as an observer, but as someone who had operated where most never would. Colonel Reich didn't elaborate further, didn't reveal assignments, didn't list qualifications, didn't tell hero stories. He simply walked past them toward the evaluation board, leaving truth hanging in the space behind him. And it was enough. Dana stood still, expression unchanged, but something flickered in her eyes. Not pride, not satisfaction, just weariness. The weariness of being seen when you'd worked so hard to stay invisible. Dalton called the formation to attention. Final qualification begins now. You will demonstrate everything you've learned this week, every drill, every technique, every correction. This is your opportunity to prove you were paying attention. The Marines moved to the firing line with purpose. No hesitation, no doubt, just focus. One by one, they executed. Tyler moved through combat reloads with precision, footwork clean, no wasted motion. Nolan engaged targets without hesitation, trusting his training, trusting his instincts. Even the quieter Marines who had struggled early in the week performed with confidence. Dana watched from the side, clipboard in hand, but she wasn't taking notes anymore. She was just watching, seeing the transformation, seeing young Marines become capable operators. Colonel Reich stood beside her, arms crossed. You've done good work here. Dana didn't respond. They'll remember this week for the rest of their careers. They'll forget me in a month. No, Colonel Reich looked at her directly. They won't, because you gave them something most instructors can't. You gave them truth. Dana's throat tightened. She looked away, focusing on the Marines downrange. Syria still bothers you, Colonel Reich said quietly. Every day. You saved 12 lives. I lost 2. You can't save everyone, Keller. Doesn't make it easier. Colonel Reich nodded slowly. No, it doesn't. They stood in silence, watching the final Marines complete their qualifications. When the last shot echoed across the range, Dalton called for weapons clear and safe. All Marines qualified, Dalton announced, voice carrying pride he didn't bother hiding. Outstanding performance across the board. The Marines didn't cheer, didn't celebrate. They just stood there, rifles at their sides, breathing heavy, knowing they'd done something important, something real. Colonel Reich stepped forward. You should be proud, not because you passed qualification, but because you learned humility. You learned to listen. You learned that expertise doesn't always announce itself. He gestured toward Dana. This woman could have embarrassed you, could have made you feel small, could have thrown her credentials in your face every time you doubted her, but she didn't. She just taught you, quietly, patiently, the way the best teachers always do. Tyler's jaw tightened. Nolan looked down, shame and gratitude mixing in his chest. Don't forget that, Colonel Reich finished. Don't forget what real strength looks like. It doesn't brag. It doesn't demand recognition. It just shows up and does the work. He nodded once, then walked back toward his vehicle. Dalton dismissed the formation. The Marines dispersed slowly, some heading toward the armory, others lingering near the range. Tyler approached Dana first, stopping a few feet away, uncertain how to begin. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for everything I said, everything I assumed. Dana looked at him, expression softening just slightly. You didn't know. I should have respected you anyway. Respect isn't given for free. You didn't owe me anything. But you gave us everything. Dana held his gaze for a long moment. No, I gave you what you needed to survive. That's not everything. That's just the beginning. Nolan approached next, standing beside Tyler. Will you be training the next group? I don't know, probably. They'll be lucky. Dana almost smiled. They'll be skeptical just like you were, and that's okay. Skepticism keeps you alert. Other Marines approached, one by one, offering quiet thanks, quiet apologies, quiet acknowledgments. Dana accepted each with a simple nod, never seeking more, never needing validation. As the sun climbed higher, the range began to empty. Marines returned to barracks, to paperwork, to the routine rhythm of military life. Dana remained at the fence line, staring downrange one last time. Sergeant Dalton approached, stopping beside her. You're leaving tomorrow. Yes. Where to? Another base, another group, same work. Dalton nodded. For what it's worth, you made a difference here. Dana turned to look at him. They made the difference. I just pointed them in the right direction. That's all teaching is. Dana considered that, then nodded slowly. I suppose it is. She turned and walked toward the equipment shed, shoulders straight, steps measured, carrying her history quietly as she always had. Dalton watched her go, then looked back at the range. The targets, the flags, the dirt marked by thousands of rounds fired over countless training cycles. But this week had been different. This week something had changed, not in the range, in the people who trained on it. And that, he knew, was what mattered most. Evening settled over Camp Waverly with the kind of gentle dimming that always follows long, meaningful days. The range lights flickered on, humming in quiet rhythm. Dust settled where boots had churned the ground all week. The last targets were stacked, paper corners curling from heat and handling. Most Marines had drifted back toward barracks, tired, quieter than the days before. Dana sat alone near the rail fence, clipboard closed, pen tucked neatly away. She didn't scroll her phone or fill silence with thoughts spoken aloud. She simply rested her hands on her knees and watched the range fall still again, like it had returned to factory settings. Footsteps approached, not rushed, not heavy. Tyler stopped beside her, not saying her name because he didn't need to. He placed his canteen on the ground, letting it sit near her foot, a gesture rough in appearance but honest in meaning. "You helped us today," he said, voice low. Dana looked toward the open space, not toward him. "You helped yourselves. I only adjusted a few things." He shifted awkwardly, like someone whose pride wasn't sure where to stand. "You knew things we didn't. Before, I thought you were just observing. I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to know," she interrupted gently. "That isn't how learning works. You don't respect someone because they tell you who they are. You respect them when they show you what matters." Tyler nodded, jaw tight, then stood there a moment longer before picking up his canteen again, not taking it back, just nudging it a few inches closer so she could keep it if she wanted. "I'll work on breathing cadence," he muttered quietly. "You will," she said, certainty in her tone. "Pressure will not change your rhythm if you decide it won't." He nodded once more and walked away. Dana turned her gaze toward fading sunlight. A breeze passed through her jacket, lifting the edge just enough for that faded fabric inside, whatever emblem it once held, to catch air for an instant before settling again. She adjusted nothing, she explained nothing. Some of the strongest people carry their history without telling it. They don't outline their qualifications. They don't list accomplishments. They don't hang stories on walls where strangers can measure them. Skill does not introduce itself. Experience doesn't announce arrival. It shows through motion, through stillness, and through silence when noise would be easier. As the light dimmed fully, and the last echo of footsteps disappeared down Range Lane, the truth settled in the air without needing anyone to declare it. Respect is earned long before anyone knows your name. Some people walk through the world without asking for validation. They don't raise their voice so others hear them. They don't wear their past on their sleeve. But their skill, their discipline, and their quiet presence change everyone around them. Dana didn't need applause or recognition to shape a group of Marines. She only needed truth, steady hands, and the courage to stand in silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.